1944. Deep inside a dimly lit German intelligence office on the outskirts of Berlin, a Luftwaffe officer stares in silence at a freshly decrypted Allied production report. The paper trembles slightly in his gloved hand. 10,000 aircraft. In 1 month. The room is heavy with disbelief. Cigarette smoke curls above the flickering light bulb as engineers and analysts exchange stunned looks. They run the numbers again. It seems impossible. No nation in history has ever built machines of war at such a scale. Cut to the roar of America's industrial heart. Massive factory floors stretch as far as the eye can see. Sparks flash from welding torches. Conveyor belts rumble. Women in coveralls rivet the wings of B-24 bombers under the deafening rhythm of hammer and steel. Giant engines are lowered into place by overhead cranes. From Detroit to California, the once silent factories of peace have become a storm of motion and fire. The arsenal of democracy breathes, alive, relentless, unstoppable. While Europe bleeds under Nazi occupation, across the Atlantic an entire nation is forging wings of victory. And this is the story of how American factories stunned the world. In 1939, the world was slipping into darkness. Europe trembled under the weight of a new kind of war. Fast, brutal, and mechanized. German panzers rolled across Poland with terrifying precision, and the Luftwaffe blackened the skies with squadrons of Messerschmitts and Stukas. It was blitzkrieg, lightning war, and no army seemed capable of resisting it. By the summer of 1940, France had fallen in just 6 weeks. Britain stood alone, battered by nightly bombing raids. London's skyline burned beneath the Luftwaffe's relentless assault. Across the English Channel, Adolf Hitler's war machine appeared invincible. Europe's industrial centers now worked for Berlin. Nazi planners boasted that no democratic nation could match their coordination or speed. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched, powerful, yet unprepared. Its army ranked 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. The U.S. Air Corps owned barely a few thousand aging aircraft, many obsolete before they even took flight. American industry, though vast, was still peacetime in spirit, making automobiles, refrigerators, and typewriters. The machinery of modern war had yet to awaken. But one man understood what was coming. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had seen the storm on the horizon long before most Americans wished to believe it. In December 1940, he took to the radio in one of his most defining moments, his Arsenal of Democracy speech. His voice, calm yet resolute, reached millions of households. "We must be the great arsenal of democracy," he declared, "for we must supply not only our own armed forces, but also those who stand against aggression." Those words marked a turning point. Without firing a shot, the United States had declared its industrial mobilization. Roosevelt knew the war would not be won by courage alone, but by production, logistics, and endurance. The nation's factories, if fully awakened, could outbuild any enemy on Earth. Still, in 1940, this was only an idea. The automobile lines in Detroit had not yet been retooled for war. Skilled engineers were still designing sedans, not bombers. Steel mills ran on limited shifts. Labor unions argued over contracts, and many Americans still clung to isolationism, unwilling to believe that Europe's war would one day reach their shores. Yet Roosevelt's administration began laying the foundations. The National Defense Advisory Commission started quietly surveying factory capacities. Contracts were issued for new planes, P-40 Warhawks, B-17 Flying Fortresses, not yet for battle, but for preparedness. The Civilian Conservation Corps and New Deal programs had already built infrastructure and trained millions. The groundwork for transformation was set. By late 1941, before Pearl Harbor, the hum of distant change was already spreading. Car manufacturers were testing bomber fuselages in their workshops. Shipyards in California were drawing plans for vessels they had never built before. America was not yet at war, but the engine was beginning to turn. Then came December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor shattered all hesitation. In a single morning, America's neutrality ended, and with it, any restraint on its industrial might. The sleeping giant had been struck, and it was about to awaken in full. The morning after Pearl Harbor, the United States transformed overnight from a nation of consumers into a nation of producers. The shock of the burning battleships in Hawaii galvanized every corner of American life. No longer was war something distant across the ocean. It was personal, urgent, and total. Factories that once built cars, radios, and farm equipment now faced a single mission: to outproduce the Axis powers. President Roosevelt called for 50,000 airplanes a year, a number so staggering that even his advisors hesitated. Yet, within months, that goal was no longer a dream. It was a blueprint. The conversion began in Detroit. The same assembly lines that had perfected the automobile were stripped bare and redesigned for war. Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant became a symbol of the new age. A mile-long facility that produced B-24 Liberator bombers with an efficiency no one had ever seen. Every 63 minutes, another four-engine bomber rolled off the line, bound for the skies over Europe. Elsewhere, Lockheed in California built sleek P-38 Lightnings. Douglas Aircraft produced waves of C-47 transports. Boeing in Seattle churned out the formidable B-17 Flying Fortress. And across the country, countless subcontractors supplied the rivets, bolts, engines, and tires that fed the endless chain. The government centralized control under the War Production Board, WPB, established in January 1942. At its helm, Donald Nelson, a former Sears Roebuck executive, coordinated thousands of private companies into a single wartime network. Civilian goods were restricted, and raw materials were rationed. Aluminum went to bombers, rubber to tires, and steel to tanks. Every ounce mattered. Meanwhile, a new army emerged, not on the battlefield, but on the factory floor. Millions of women entered the workforce for the first time, replacing men who had gone to fight overseas. They wore bandanas, coveralls, and confidence. Rosie the Riveter became the face of the movement, her rolled-up sleeve and determined stare symbolizing the strength of an industrial revolution powered by ordinary citizens. African-American workers, long excluded from skilled labor, now joined defense plants in record numbers, fighting two battles, one against fascism abroad and another for equality at home. The pressure of wartime necessity cracked open barriers that peace had kept closed. Out west, Henry J. Kaiser transformed shipbuilding forever. His assembly line shipyards in Richmond and Portland could produce a Liberty ship, a full cargo vessel, in less than 5 days. What had once taken months now took hours. His philosophy was simple. Speed means lives. While the Allies marveled at the scale, German intelligence officers struggled to comprehend it. Reports from their embassies and spies in South America filtered back to Berlin, describing production rates beyond belief. In one 1943 Luftwaffe analysis, a colonel scribbled in frustration, "They build planes as we build bicycles." For the Nazi war machine, which relied heavily on forced labor and limited resources, such efficiency was unthinkable. German factories worked under the constant shadow of Allied bombing, each strike crippling output. In contrast, American plants ran 24 hours a day, unthreatened, fueled by endless electricity, raw materials, and determination. By late 1943, the numbers told the story. Over 85,000 aircraft produced in a single year. And yet, the true measure of America's power wasn't just the machines, it was the rhythm, the heartbeat of industry itself. The arsenal of democracy had reached full strength, and soon Its thunder would echo across the skies of Europe. Industrial scale. In the heart of Michigan, a new kind of battlefield emerged. It wasn't made of mud or trenches. It was made of concrete, steel, and sweat. Ford's Willow Run plant stretched across an area so vast it had its own weather patterns. This single factory was designed to do what no other had ever attempted: mass-produce heavy bombers as if they were automobiles. Engineers reimagined the entire process. Instead of craftsmen building one plane at a time, Ford applied the assembly line genius that had revolutionized the Model T. At its peak, Willow Run produced one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, a staggering tempo of creation. Each bomber contained more than 1 million parts, yet every piece arrived precisely on time. From every corner of the nation, the plant ran day and night, its lights glowing like a second sunrise over the flat Michigan plains. Workers ate meals beside roaring machinery, hands blackened by oil and aluminum dust. When the first completed bomber rolled out, Henry Ford simply said, "We've done the impossible." In truth, it was only the beginning. Technological adaptation. American engineers faced a monumental challenge: building aircraft faster than ever without sacrificing reliability. Traditional aircraft production had relied on hand-fitting components and custom craftsmanship. But America didn't have the luxury of time. The solution: standardization. Factories began using interchangeable parts and unified design blueprints across manufacturers. Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed shared components that could be swapped from one model to another. This was revolutionary. It allowed subcontractors, often thousands of miles apart, to build fuselage sections, wings, and engines that fit together with microscopic precision. The same system that once produced Chevrolets and Packards now birthed fleets of P-51 Mustangs and C-47 Skytrains. America had turned war into a science of efficiency. Technicians learned new alloys, new welding methods, new tools, all developed in months rather than years. The result was industrial agility, unlike anything the world had seen. Workforce revolution. Behind the machines stood the people. Millions of them. For every aircraft in the sky, thousands of hands had shaped its metal. With men conscripted into the armed forces, America turned to a workforce long overlooked. Women answered the call. They filled assembly halls in Detroit, Long Beach, and Seattle. They riveted wings, welded hulls, and operated cranes. They trained in technical schools, mastering blueprints and gauges once reserved for men. The image of Rosie the Riveter captured this transformation: confident, capable, and unyielding. Minority workers, too, stepped forward. African Americans, Mexican Americans, and Native Americans joined the industrial front, often overcoming discrimination and harsh conditions. Executive Order 8802, signed by Roosevelt in 1941, outlawed racial discrimination in defense industries, a milestone that began reshaping the American workplace. This wasn't just labor. It was national unity forged through necessity. In every hammer strike and rivet line, America's social fabric stretched and evolved. The factory became both weapon and symbol, a place where democracy itself was built piece by piece. As the smokestacks thickened and the assembly lines thundered, the world began to notice. Germany's engineers couldn't believe the reports. The numbers didn't seem real, yet they were, and soon they would darken the skies of Europe. German perspective. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, disbelief turned into dread. Reports from German intelligence officers, spies, and neutral observers painted a picture too extraordinary to accept. American production figures, tens of thousands of aircraft each year, seemed like Allied propaganda. Yet every month, new bombers filled the skies over Europe. Captured documents after the war revealed just how stunned German engineers were. They noted that America's factories produce airplanes as fast as we build bicycles. Luftwaffe officers debated whether the numbers were even possible, convinced that some trick of statistics must be involved. But reality was cruelly visible in the contrails above. By 1943, the Allies' relentless bombing raids, the product of those same factories, struck deep into Germany's industrial core. For the first time, Nazi scientists realized that their technical ingenuity was powerless without mass production behind it. They had precision, but not scale. America had both, leadership and logistics. None of this was accidental. The miracle of production was orchestrated by a coalition of visionaries and pragmatists. President Franklin D. Roosevelt set the tone with his calm authority and unwavering belief in industrial victory. He empowered a network of leaders who could translate that vision into output. At the center stood Donald M. Nelson, head of the War Production Board. Once an executive at Sears, Nelson understood logistics on a continental scale. Under his leadership, America's manufacturing landscape became a single coordinated organism. Raw materials flowed like blood through arteries of railroads and highways. Then came Henry Ford, whose factories embodied mechanical genius. William Knudsen, a Danish-born engineer who unified the auto industry for war. And Henry J. Kaiser, the shipbuilder who defied impossibility. Together, they created not just machines, but systems, production as a weapon. Supply chains stretched from the iron mines of Minnesota to the shipyards of California, each part synchronized. It was warfare by coordination, and Roosevelt's government ensured that no factory stood idle. "We will outbuild them," he said. And they did. Moral dimension. But beyond the machinery lay a profound moral contrast. In the Axis nations, production was driven by coercion. German and Japanese factories relied heavily on forced labor. Prisoners, conscripts, and concentration camp inmates worked under brutal conditions, often to death. The work was sustained by fear. In the United States, production was driven by choice. Men and women volunteered long shifts, bought war bonds, and accepted rationing as a patriotic duty. Children collected scrap metal. Posters reminded citizens that victory is made by production. The emotional core of America's war effort wasn't obedience, it was belief. Each worker on the assembly line understood the stakes. Every bomber wing, every ship hull represented lives. Brothers, sons, and fathers fighting overseas. The connection between the home front and the battlefield was intimate and immediate. Factories became more than workplaces. They became symbols of freedom's endurance. Where totalitarianism sought domination through terror, democracy answered with unity, industry, and purpose. This moral engine, invisible yet powerful, fueled every turning gear and flying propeller. By 1944, that unity had become unstoppable. America's industrial strength was now not only the envy of its enemies, it was their undoing. By 1943, the full force of American industry had reached its zenith. Across the United States, more than 300,000 warplanes had rolled off the assembly lines. The once skeptical production goals set by Roosevelt were no longer ambitions. They were being shattered month after month. In June alone, over 10,000 aircraft left American factories, bound for training fields, carrier decks, and distant combat zones. Europe felt the weight of this transformation before a single Allied soldier set foot on its soil. The skies, once dominated by the Luftwaffe, now belonged to the Allies. Endless formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 fortresses. Liberators droned high above the clouds, their silver wings glinting in the sun. Below them, the thunder of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs escorted them deep into German airspace, ensuring the bombers reached their targets. Every aircraft represented not just engineering triumph, but industrial will, the living proof that America's factories could project power across oceans. Airfields in England and Italy became staging grounds for an unbroken rhythm of missions. Each morning, the air trembled as hundreds of engines roared to life, the synchronized sound of democracy on the offensive. For the men on the ground in occupied Europe, it was a sign of hope. To the Germans, it was a growing shadow. Cities that had once been considered untouchable, Hamburg, Cologne, Berlin, were now within reach of bombers built thousands of miles away by workers who had never seen the battlefield. As 1944 approached, the stakes intensified. The Allies were preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in history, Operation Overlord. The success of D-Day would depend on one critical factor: air superiority. Without it, the beaches of Normandy would become killing grounds. American and British planners knew it. For months, the 8th Air Force launched relentless bombing campaigns to cripple German railways, airfields, and fuel supplies. Day after day, the formations grew larger, the precision deadlier. The goal was simple: to leave the Luftwaffe blind and broken before the invasion. By spring 1944, that goal was reality. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Hitler's war machine, was on the verge of collapse. Outnumbered, outgunned, and starved of fuel, its pilots faced impossible odds. For every German plane destroyed, America could replace 10. For every pilot lost, another was trained, supplied, and equipped in record time. From the skies over Normandy to the factories of Detroit, everything was connected. One seamless web of determination. The soldiers who stormed Omaha and Utah Beach carried with them the invisible strength of millions back home. The riveters, welders, and machinists who had given them wings and cover from above. As the first paratroopers dropped into France on the night of June 23, yet die Befreiungsstand von 1944, the success of the invasion rested not only on courage, but on the machinery that filled the sky. Thousands of aircraft built by the industrial colossus America had become. For the German command, watching from bunkers and observation posts, the sight was overwhelming. An airborne storm, stretching horizon to horizon. The realization began to set in. This was not just another front. It was the end of the Luftwaffe's dominance and the beginning of Germany's industrial defeat. By the summer of 1944, the sky over Germany had become a crucible of steel and fire. Each day, thousands of Allied bombers crossed the Channel, escorted by fighters whose endurance and numbers the Luftwaffe could no longer match. The strategic bombing campaign, once an ambitious theory, was now a relentless, grinding reality. Entire cities were turned into industrial battlefields. The targets were no longer just military depots or airfields, but the arteries of German production itself. Oil refineries, ball-bearing plants, locomotive works, and aircraft factories. The Allies aimed not merely to destroy machines, but to break the very backbone of the Nazi war economy. From the air, it was a haunting sight, columns of smoke rising hundreds of feet into the atmosphere, the ground below a maze of burning factories and twisted railways. German engineers, who had prided themselves on precision craftsmanship, watched helplessly as their facilities vanished beneath waves of bombs. For them, the realization was bitter and final. They could design elegant aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me 262 or the Focke-Wulf 190, but they could not build them in numbers that mattered. Their factories lacked resources, their workers were overworked and underfed, and their supply lines shattered. Even the revolutionary jet engines that might have changed the war arrived too late, too few. Captured after the war, many German engineers spoke with a kind of grim admiration. "We could never match their production," one Luftwaffe officer admitted during interrogation. "They built planes faster than we could count them." The statistics were staggering. In 1944 alone, the United States produced over 96,000 aircraft. Germany, battered by bombing and shortages, managed barely a fraction of that number. Every lost factory meant fewer bombers to defend the Reich, fewer pilots trained, and fewer chances of turning the tide. On the ground, the impact was catastrophic. Fuel shortages crippled the Wehrmacht. Supply trains stalled. Tank divisions stood idle, unable to move. The skies that had once thundered with Luftwaffe squadrons were now silent or filled only with the enemy's roar. In the east, the Red Army pressed toward Poland after the victory at Stalingrad, while in the west, the Allies broke through Normandy and raced across France. Germany's war machine, once so confident in its technological superiority, was collapsing from within, undone not by lack of ingenuity, but by the cold arithmetic of mass production. Hitler, furious at his generals and engineers, demanded miracles that could no longer be delivered. His speeches grew desperate, detached from reality. No amount of propaganda could conceal the truth. Germany was losing not just on the battlefield, but in the factories. The power of production had become the new weapon of war. Each bomber overhead was a declaration that the age of limited warfare was over, that victory in the modern era belonged to the nation that could build, transport, and sustain on a scale beyond imagination. As 1945 dawned, the skies over Berlin darkened once more, not with hope, but with the steady, mechanical rhythm of Allied aircraft born from American assembly lines. The war that had begun with blitzkrieg, speed, surprise, and precision, was ending with another kind of storm, a flood of steel forged by millions of unseen hands. The world's balance of power had shifted forever. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the scale of destruction across Europe was beyond comprehension. From the smoldering ruins of Dresden to the bombed-out skeletons of Cologne and Hamburg, Germany's once mighty industrial empire lay in ashes. The very factories that had powered Hitler's war machine were twisted into rubble. Railways were shattered, oil refineries burned dry, and bridges collapsed into the rivers they once spanned. For Germany, the reckoning was not only military but industrial, a collapse of capacity, resources, and morale. Its workforce was broken, millions dead or displaced, its engineers scattered and disillusioned. The Luftwaffe, once a symbol of modern warfare, had ceased to exist. Production records ended abruptly in early 1945. The machines that once built Messerschmitts and Panzer tanks now sat silent under layers of ash. Across the Atlantic, a very different picture emerged. The United States, untouched by war on its soil, stood at the pinnacle of industrial might. By the war's end, America had produced over 300,000 aircraft, 100,000 tanks, 6,000 ships, and countless vehicles and munitions. No nation in history had ever matched such output. Factories that had once raced to meet impossible quotas now found themselves with vast capacity, and no enemy left to fight. The question was, what now? Almost overnight, the machinery of war began to reshape itself for peace. Assembly lines that had once produced bombers began turning out passenger planes. Shipyards shifted to commercial vessels. The same engineers who had optimized production for destruction were now designing for reconstruction. Companies like Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed converted their wartime designs into civil aviation marvels. The B-29's pressurized fuselage became the blueprint for the next generation of airliners. Ford and General Motors, masters of mass production, retooled to build cars for a booming post-war consumer market. America's highways, airports, and suburbs would all grow from the techniques refined in wartime. But it wasn't only technology that transformed. It was identity. The war had revealed the soul of American industry. Flexible, inventive, and limitless when united by purpose. Workers who had once riveted wings now dreamed of new possibilities. Homes, televisions, automobiles, and a modern life powered by the same discipline that had won the war. Meanwhile, Europe struggled to recover. German cities resembled lunar landscapes. Its once proud engineers scavenged through the debris of their factories, salvaging what they could. Allied occupation authorities dismantled what remained of armament plants, shipping machinery as reparations. But among the devastation, the seeds of something new were planted. A recognition, even among defeated scientists, that industrial warfare had forever changed the rules of global power. They had witnessed a kind of production beyond ideology, an economy mobilized not by tyranny, but by collaboration. Even in defeat, many German engineers privately admitted respect for the American model. It had been built not on fear, but on belief, and belief had proved stronger. By 1946, the world was shifting again. The thunder of factories no longer echoed for war, but for rebirth. And yet, beneath the optimism of peacetime, a new tension was quietly forming, one that would turn the legacy of wartime production into a weapon of a different kind. The world was entering a new era, and America's industrial engine would soon find itself at the center of another confrontation. The war was over, but its machinery had only just begun to shape the future. Between 1945 and 1950, the same assembly lines that had crushed the Axis powers became the foundation of a new global order, one defined not by battles, but by production, influence, and ideology. The United States emerged from the Second World War not just victorious, but transformed into the greatest industrial power in human history. Its wartime factories, vast, efficient, and disciplined, did not close. They evolved. The momentum of total war shifted seamlessly into the rhythm of the Cold War. Out of this transformation arose what President Eisenhower would later call the military-industrial complex. The collaboration between government, science, and private industry, once forged to defeat fascism, was now redirected toward containing communism. The Pentagon became the new central planner of production. Aircraft manufacturers who had built B-17s and B-29s now turned their genius to jet bombers and nuclear delivery systems. The same companies that had once supplied Allied bombers were now building B-52 stratofortresses and intercontinental missiles. War had ended, but the machinery of preparation never stopped. At the same time, America turned its immense industrial surplus outward, not as a weapon, but as aid. In 1948, Secretary of State George C. Marshall unveiled a plan that would reshape Europe's future. The Marshall Plan. Billions of dollars worth of American goods, technology, and industrial expertise flowed into the shattered economies of Western Europe. Machinery, tools, and even factory blueprints were shipped across the Atlantic. The same production methods that had powered wartime America now rebuilt peacetime Europe. For the Germans, it was a paradox. Just a few years earlier, they had sent spies to understand America's assembly lines, only to dismiss them as inefficient and chaotic. Now, those same techniques, flexible production, standardized parts, decentralized innovation, became the template for rebuilding their own economy. By the early 1950s, West Germany had become the industrial heart of Europe once again, but this time under a different philosophy: cooperation instead of conquest. German engineers studied American methods with fascination, adapting them to their precision-driven culture. They marveled not at the machines themselves, but at the system, the way American industry balanced freedom and control, scale and speed, creativity and discipline. One post-war German engineer reportedly remarked, "We had the science, they had the system, and the system won." That system, the fusion of private enterprise and public coordination, would define the 20th century. It built not only weapons, but cars, televisions, highways, and rockets. From the ruins of Europe to the dawn of the space age, the American industrial miracle became both a model and a warning. Yet, behind the triumph, a shadow lingered. The same efficiency that had built liberty could now manufacture fear. As Cold War tensions deepened, production once again shifted toward arms. Nuclear warheads, bombers, submarines. The factories that had won World War II were now preparing for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Still, the moral legacy of the arsenal of democracy endured. It had proven that freedom, when organized and determined, could outbuild tyranny. It had shown that ideas, not just machines, win wars. And even as the world divided once more, the echo of those wartime assembly lines remained a reminder of what unity, purpose, and belief could create. The arsenal of democracy had ended one war and defined the shape of every peace that followed. The noise has faded now. The stamping presses are silent. The welders' sparks long gone. The great hangars that once shook with the rhythm of engines now stand as quiet monuments of steel and memory. But listen closely, and you can still hear it. The echo of industry, the heartbeat of a nation that refused to surrender to despair. During those desperate years of the Second World War, victory was not decided solely on the beaches of Normandy or the skies over Berlin. It was forged in the unseen battles of production, in the clatter of rivet guns, the grind of assembly lines, and the determination of ordinary people who believed that their labor could change the course of history. 10,000 planes a month. It was more than a number. It was a statement that freedom could be organized, that democracy could build faster, dream larger, and endure longer than tyranny ever could. When the engines of war finally fell silent, they left behind something far greater than destruction. They left knowledge, the understanding that the true power of a nation lies not only in its armies, but in its ability to create, to adapt, to unite. From the arsenal of democracy came the modern world. Highways and airports, consumer technology, global trade. The same spirit that built the bombers of Willow Run would one day put a man on the moon. And yet, behind all the machinery, it was always human hands, the riveters, machinists, engineers, and dreamers, who carried the weight of history. As the smoke of war drifted away, one truth remained. In the age of total war, victory was not just won on the battlefield. It was won on the assembly line, where freedom found its rhythm and the future of the modern world began to hum.